I think we'll begin now. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you to our guests, Gina, Letty, and Tan, who are from Western Washington University, and they will be presenting on this community ambassador program. And I don't know how you want to handle questions. This is also FYI part of our Sea Change webinar series for the Physics and Astronomy Sea Change project. And if you would like to know more about that, I will put some information in the chat then while our speakers begin.
Hi everyone. I'm going to share our slides, and then I'll let my co-presenters introduce themselves as well. So let me do that right now. I'm Regina Barber DeGraaff. I'm going to start this right here. I teach at Western Washington University half-time physics and astronomy in Bellingham, Washington with Thanh, Lei, and the other half of my job is STEM inclusion and outreach specialist. So I'll let Thanh introduce herself.
Hi, and thanks for everyone for coming today. My name is Thanh Lei. I'm an assistant professor at Western Washington University in the physics and astronomy department with Regina, and also in the science, mathematics, and technology education program.
And hi everyone, my name is Leticia Romo. She, her, hers are my pronouns. I currently serve as the Director of Student Equity and Engagement at Chaffey College. But about a year ago, I started at Chaffey. But prior to that, I was at Western Washington University, where I got to work alongside Regina and Thanh.
So we're just going to get started, and we can take, we're willing and happy to take questions at the end. We'll just kind of go through this presentation we have, and then we will definitely have enough time to answer any questions. And if there isn't enough time and I'm totally wrong, we'll give you our email so you can email us if you have any extra questions. So just to give you some background, like what is the Community Ambassador Program? Well, before we even get to there, we had to like set up like what kind of inclusion work was actually happening at Western Washington University, and specifically in the College of Science and Engineering, where Thanh and I teach. I'm a non-tenure track instructor. I do have a PhD in physics, but I don't do any research. So I started working at Western, and I started doing a lot of like outreach work, and I started advising on like projects that were trying to be more inclusive. And after the first 2 years of doing that volunteer and teaching like 2 to 3 classes a quarter, I approached the brand new dean that was hired and said that like there should be a position and I should be compensated for this work. And I like wrote up a 20-something page proposal. And so that position has been around for about 6 years now. So I've been doing that half-time for about 6 years. And what I noticed is that like there was a large number of requests that were coming my way. Emails, I would hold regular community hours. That's what I call them, but they're basically office hours where people can come, tell me their concerns, give me feedback, process what's happening, ask for resources, that kind of stuff. That was just a small part of this part-time job. I was also like, again, advising on these grants, all this kind of stuff. And there's just all these requests coming my way. And I was the only like named person oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Trying to move the little faces. I was the only named person that was like focused on inclusion and outreach at the college. So I knew that there were other people doing this work. They just weren't named or compensated. So I wanted to put together a program where people who were, focused on racial equity, gender equity, leading seminars, that kind of stuff, writing grants, could actually be compensated for their time and also be able to work together. Just a little background, the Western Washington University is a PWI, predominantly white institution. It's like the College of Science and Engineering is even whiter and even more male. Western Washington University is actually majority female, just barely. The retention of the faculty and staff and students of color is very low. So actually, right before we implemented this program, myself and the dean, a lot of students actually came to the dean and said that students of color and students from the queer community they felt like they weren't being supported. So this program really came at a good time that the people wanted it or needed it. So what is the program? Basically, 1 or 2 faculty members from each department. So we have geology, biology, chemistry, engineering, computer science, math, physics, and am I forgetting one? Which one am I forgetting? Let the year 10. Did I forget one? I think that's everybody. Okay, those are all our departments, and these community ambassadors are compensated by service release. So they don't have to do all those committees and stuff like that. Either all their service release is taken away or like most of it. So their load of service is really low, but also if non-tenure track faculty apply, because there's an application process, they get actually compensated financially. And we were hoping, and we did for the most part, get faculty members that are already, like I said, engaged in equity and diversity and inclusion work in STEM specifically. Okay, so just to give you some background, and the reason we decided to give you a timeline is just to see, like, if you are interested in doing something like this at your own institution, like what actually happened at our institution and what kind of support did we have at our institution for this to actually happen. So again, I established the STEM inclusion and outreach specialist position. So there was a named person in the college doing this work. What was actually happening at Western as a whole, I have on the bottom line here. And just a quick plug for one of my colleagues that made actually a timeline of basically racism and racial discrimination specifically, and violence in Bellingham, Washington, in our region, is actually outlined in this timeline. So this wp.ww.edu/timeline. Check it out. This is where I'm getting a lot of this stuff, a lot of the recent stuff. It goes all the way back to, thousands of years. So a college-wide equity, inclusion, and diversity committee was established. So now I was the only named person, but now there was a committee that was actually focused on more policy parts of like tenure and promotion, hiring, that kind of stuff. That there would be this committee that advised on that. At the same time, a lot of anti-Semitic events happened at Western. There was graffiti. There was somebody went into the library and like ripped a whole bunch of books that focused on Jewish history. And then there was a swastika put on my door, which was interesting. All of that, the president actually mentioned it, and he kind of lumped in the event that happened, the swastika on my door, with the anti-Semitism. But I just wanted to point out that like it wasn't the same thing. Swastikas can be used to intimidate people of color, and I think that that's something that some of our colleagues didn't understand. The swastika wasn't put on my door because they thought I was Jewish. So students, again, came to talk to the dean, like I mentioned before, who were people of color and people from the queer community. They hold multiple identities that's what I said. And they organized and they talked to the dean. We had to negotiate with the chairs to figure out how we would be compensating these faculty. My dream was to actually give them course release, at least one of the quarters, but that financially would have taken much longer to implement this program. So because we gave them course release, we could just like get this program running as soon as possible, basically. And we'll talk about like how Ten and I want to like kind of move forward, and maybe we can find some more financial means, but this is the timeline we have so far. There was an application process, and then in the fall of 2019, we did select faculty, and the committee that looked at the applications was myself, Ten, Leti, and then a student. So we had a student looking at those applications as well. And again, still racist propaganda, graffiti, all that stuff is happening still on Western's campus. The cohort met, they were going strong the first year, our first year running. Leti and Ten took a lot of data, interviewed the cohort at the beginning and at the end of the year, and then the pandemic started near the end of the year. And we're in our second year of this program. Okay, so our initial goals really were to, like I've already mentioned this, but it's good to like be repetitive, I guess. But like we wanted to be this kind of supporting group. I'm going to the second one right away, but I wanted to make sure that the faculty who are doing this work had a community, could be able to talk to each other about work-life balance, about boundaries, brainstorming what to do with each other. We have some references here that, you know, in the literature that this stuff works and people are needing it or doing this. But we also wanted to be like conduits of communication, conduits of resources. I wanted, because I was getting a lot of requests, I wanted to have people on a smaller scale. I don't know I'm not a geologist, I'm a physicist, I'm not a, you know, biologist. I wanted somebody embedded in that department that could ask, answer specific questions and about resources in those specific fields. And not, I didn't want these faculty members to be asked to do things. I didn't want them to, somebody to say, oh, I have this great idea, now you do it. I wanted it to be very clear that the community ambassadors, these faculty that are in this program, are there to help you figure out how to do it and to guide you to the resources, but not to be, I'm just gonna be honest, not to be your servants, not to be your equity servants. Right? And I wanted to have there to be compensation. So those were our initial goals to begin with.
Yeah, so I think what we would like to do now is to share with you what we learned about the strengths and limitations of the community ambassador program in this first year. So that was, again, in the 2019-2020 academic school year. And in the first year, we had 7 community ambassadors. And so each of these community ambassadors, again, as Regina mentioned, is a faculty member that's representing every department in the College of Science and Engineering. So this includes engineering, physics, biology, chemistry, geology, computer science, and math. And so in this table here, you see the summary of our community ambassadors in this first cohort, the gender, the race and ethnicity, the nationality, and the career stage of the participating faculty members. And we had 5 women and 2 men. 5 were white and 2 were faculty of color who were also both international. 5 of our community ambassadors were already tenured, and the remaining 2 are on the tenure track. One of the community ambassadors was on a non-tenure track position, but transitioned to a tenure track line. We interviewed, actually Letty did the interviews at the start and the end of the year using a semi-structured interview protocol. And the questions that she asked broadly focus on the community ambassadors' perceived support from their department, the college, and the program, and also about their work-life balance. We interviewed all but one of the community ambassador, and that is Gina. She's grayed out in the table. And to analyze the data, we transcribed the audio, and then in the first phase of our analysis, we all individually read. So that's Letty, Regina, and I. We read through the transcripts, and then we just used open coding, and then met several times to discuss our codes, to narrow down our focus codes, our XR codes, and then return to the transcripts to apply these codes. And then from there, we return to our transcript to generate our findings. So we'd like to share 2 key preliminary findings. I'll be presenting the first one, and Letty will present the second one. The first finding is that we found that each department varies in how it values service and in its perception on whose responsibility it is to do equity, inclusion, diversity work. So this was evident in the unexpected expectations of each department. So even though our institution, Western, is a primarily undergraduate institution, the community ambassadors, the faculty share that their department prioritizes research, and it's a requirement for tenure. So for example, Leon, he shared that the focus of his department is building a research program. And then anything else was perceived as a distraction from research. So he says that there's a tendency culturally in the department to sort of focus on building that up without consideration to any factors that could be viewed as taking resources away from that enterprise. Leon also shared, and Leon was already tenured, he was told by his colleagues to reduce his service. So he says that I've gotten feedback from my colleagues that I should probably scale back a little bit on the service contribution. So in his department, the implicit message was to prioritize research, and it devalues service work. Cultural taxation was also another unspoken expectation. And cultural taxation is this concept that additional responsibilities are placed upon non-white faculty because of their ethnic or racial backgrounds. And so one of these responsibilities is serving as the department expert for issues relating to equity, inclusion, and diversity. So in this case, to serve as a community ambassador. So Eva expressed this concern. So she says that one thing I fear, which doesn't mean that it's going to happen this way, is that only people who are minorities are encouraged to participate. And I fear this because that's what happened to me. There are also differences between the faculty members who were recognized for their labor. So white faculty expressed that they were rewarded for their labor, but then they also recognized that they received more credit than their non-white colleagues. So Beth was aware of this, and she shared with us, I can say a lot of things and people are oh yeah, that's totally reasonable. I talk to my colleagues of color and I'm not going to share those things because I'm just going to come across as that whiny minority. And this was also echoed by Eva, who shared that she had many resources and people to talk to address an issue that's related to DEI, but she was skeptical whether or not her colleagues would actually listen to her. So she shared that I have a lot of people to talk to, have a conversation about that, and figure out how I can address that issue. That doesn't mean that when I try to address that issue, people will respond. Some community ambassadors, they also felt that they had to engage, they didn't feel that they had to engage in EID work, other faculty in the department, because there was already someone appointed to do that. So there was a community ambassador to do that. So Grace has shared that I feel that the existence of this role as an ambassador in the program is great, but I also think it relieves a lot of responsibility from the faculty and that nothing will happen unless I do it. So that was our first key finding, and Letty will be sharing with you our second key finding.
Thank you, Thanh. As you know, as we were going through the data, there was a couple things that I would say that we were kind of thinking was going to pop up, right? The ways in which we were seeing it play out. But this particular preliminary finding has more to do with, you know, how this cohort model was really impactful and really important for our community ambassadors. So you'll see in some of the quotes that were shared is that there's this feeling of the shared emotional stress, right? So that burden. Go ahead, Regina. I think Jimmy really brought this together when he shared, you know, that he, like, there was times, and I won't read this verbatim, but where he was sharing, like, you know, there was times where we know when you're doing equity work and inclusion and diversity work, that it's very taxing, and sometimes you need to take a step away to be able to, you know, take care of your trauma and take care of your you know, issues that are happening. And there's something about being in a cohort that made him feel like he was actually being supported now, that he wasn't the only person that had to push forward some of the agenda that they were trying to move within the college, to know that there was people that he could take a rest, a break, not worry about it for a couple days to figure out, you know, work on himself and make sure that he was ready to go, and then be able to jump back into the conversation in a way that was like, it was still moving and didn't rely solely on him. And what we saw was that there was other community ambassadors within the other colleges that were feeling that, right? I'm the only person in my college that is doing this work, and I'm the only person because everybody keeps coming to me. And now all of a sudden we created this cohort model where it was like, oh, I can talk to you about these things. I can engage with you and others in this, so that it doesn't become all of a sudden just one person saying something and everyone being against it, right? And so this kind of leads into the second preliminary, the second part of this finding, which is that power and safety in numbers. So as, and we'll see, like Sarah mentioned this, and then there was a few others that also mentioned it, but Sarah in particular was saying, you know, this gives me a platform. This is allowing me to say, hey, collectively we're all doing this as an ambassador program, which means this entire college is trying to move in this direction versus trying to be the only person that is trying to push it, right? So this feeling of like there's others that have the same goal when it comes to equity and inclusion. And it felt more powerful. So the voices felt like they were being heard. Additionally, things like where she mentions here, I'm like, hey, the community ambassadors feel strongly about this. And here's, you know, XYZ statement from the community ambassadors. So instead of it just being something that I'm saying, it's something that a group of us are saying that's across departments, across the college. And I think that makes it a lot easier for me to share information with my peers in a way that it's helpful. And I think it's heard in a different way. It's not dismissed.
So yeah, so with those preliminary findings, we noticed that we had these initial goals, and we were like, these faculty could be conduits of knowledge, they can support each other. But what we really kind of discovered through the first year was that they really enjoyed doing collaborative work. It started with a lot of the faculty continuing to do their own individual work that they had been doing and supporting each other, you know, verbally and asking each other questions. But and then towards the end, when the pandemic started, we started meeting online once a week. And we and also, you know, stuff was happening in the world. There was police brutality was you know, a protest against police brutality. And we were collectively writing statements, and we were collectively addressing those things. So these collective initiatives was something that our faculty really found beneficial in the focus groups, or sorry, in the interviews.
And I think it's important for us as we move forward, right? When Regina, Thanh, and I were talking about this presentation and really thinking about what are some things, if we had looked back and known what we know now, what would have changed? How would we have been able to give those words of advice for you all who are here thinking about like, we need this at our institution, or we're trying to strengthen our support to our students of underrepresented backgrounds to be present in our departments or in our colleges. And one of the things that we're realizing as we're talking about it is the recognition that there's a system that we're trying to go against, right? A system that has systemically been inequitable, has systemically been based on white supremacy. And it's going to be really, how do we position this type of program to be able to make the impactful change that we know that it can make. We see it in the way that even our faculty who are engaged in EID work really felt this sense of like community, and really felt this strong sense of, I am not alone in my strive for equity, diversity, and inclusion within my STEM area, right? And so when we're talking about, you know, putting people together, what we're asking is also, how do we hold people accountable? What are the ways that if a community ambassador were not to make changes, or were not to be able to, you know, make encouragement or encouraging movement forward, how do we hold them accountable to the expectation of what a community ambassador should be making, right? Thinking about, like, if you can't recognize as an institution the way that power and privilege exists in our system, then we got somewhere else to be, like, we have somewhere else to get started. So so what we're trying to show with this slide is how are we setting up, you can set up an ambassador program, but the community ambassador program, in order to make the effective change it needs to be systemic change. It needs to be part of the funding. It needs to be part of power, like the decisions that are being made. It needs to have support from our higher positions who have access to the dollars, who have access to hiring, who can change policies and procedures, who can challenge the curriculum to be decolonized, to change the way that we're seeing the educational package, right? So so we wanted to make sure that when we're talking about, like, moving forward, what are some things that we learned about, we are operating within this understanding that we need to figure out if we want to make true change and not just the superficial, we're going to create this and everybody feels better about themselves, but actually start changing the numbers and the way that we're recruiting, hiring, selecting, onboarding, retaining our faculty of color. How are we removing barriers that don't need to be there for our students, our staff, our faculty who want to be engaged and who want to be part of the STEM community. So I wanted to go ahead and kind of set up that stage, making sure that we're kind of on the same page when we talk about here are some lessons learned. Because if you're not understanding the way that it kind of gets packaged together, then it doesn't matter how great where you think your program is going to be, because you need to be thinking about the next step ahead of how are we changing those other facets to it. So
yeah, I can talk about the first one here. So yeah, the things we kind of learned, resiliency versus dependency. We said that because when you get into these positions, even myself personally, I start to learn how much this takes. This work really takes a lot from you. We had faculty in the program that said, Gina, I've only been doing a mini version of your job for a year now, and I can't even, I can't believe how much you have to deal with. So what does it look like? What does it look like to be a CA? And we're thinking, talking about how they're feeling burnout. And again, they're just, they were doing this work before, but now because they're this high profile position associated with my position, now they're feeling a lot of burnout, and we're trying to figure out how do we work as a cohesive unit, right, to help each other. How do we talk to the higher up, the chairs, the deans, to explain, no, the CA can't do this because they're burnt out now, or this is not what it's for. However, it's also we also need to talk about that once you have this position, once you make a program like this, if you're given a title that relates to social justice or equity, you're given instant credibility. So how do we deal with that? If everyone's getting the same amount of credibility, but there's different levels of engagement, and Letty and Thanh had mentioned that our faculty, community ambassadors had said, certain identities got more credit than the other. So it's just, we talked about that a lot. And I'll let Letty, do you want to talk about the performance versus performative versus pressure?
Yeah, and kind of going on to that burnout thing is this feeling of how do we move beyond looking at it as only this is the only people that can do the equity work. And sometimes, as we had seen in one of the quotes earlier, is that there's this idea that they're the only ones that can do it, or they're the only ones that can do it this well. And so what we have seen among the CAs, both in the time that we've had different cohorts, is recognizing that for some, it is this feeling of I'm not good enough, right? I am not that person that can talk about that, or I'm going to do this because I need it to be on my my tenure application, or I'm going to do this because I know that if I'm part of this, then they're going to think of me as an ally. And there's a difference between doing it for performative reasons, which is more of the low-hanging fruit, right? Oh, I can hold some office hours. I can help write a letter, right? Versus recognizing versus this idea of we need to step into this role and actually start moving the needle versus just staying where it's at, or moving it just a little bit, but actually thinking of it in that holistic way of engagement. So I think that there's this piece where we'll see that there are some CAs who have don't feel like they're engaged in it, or sometimes they don't see that their work, on the contrary, they don't see how their work is actually really rooted in social justice and equity and inclusion. And so it's trying to figure out how do we help our CAs through that process of this is performative, and this over here is where we need to be putting a little bit more focus on when it comes to their performances.
Yeah, and we don't want to pretend that that's easy, right? That when a faculty member is going in and might, like they said, their motivations might be veering on performative. They might not know that. They need to be, let known. But it's also hard to do coalitional work. I want to be very clear about this. These are really hot. They're, a lot of these topics, racism, sexism, homophobia, violence against Black, people in our community, those are really tension-filled, energy-draining topics. And when you're trying to do coalitional work, you have to be really clear about who's doing what role, how much time do you have to do that role, who has the skill set to do that role. It's there. We want to share the load, but we also don't want people to kind of back off because they're overwhelmed. We want them to tell us they're overwhelmed and we can work through it, right? So there's just a lot of stuff that we're learning. The goals, we keep on saying goals over and over. Ooh, got to go back. But it's really about community. It's really about support. And this program has been somewhat successful because it has made a lot of efforts that people didn't know that were happening. It's made them visible because, again, we're bringing a whole bunch of faculty that are doing this work together in one cohort. And then there's grants, there's other programs across the college that talk to us because we have these community hours and then work with us. So there's just a lot more visibility of what's going on. And now we kind of want to move forward to make sure that the efforts that we're doing are actually effective. That's really our next step. So I don't know, Thanh, if you want to help me out with the next step.
Real quick before we go, I think there's something else to be said, and it's really important for everyone on the call to recognize that tenure track and non-tenure track and how they engage in social justice and equity work is going to make a difference, right? Like what their status is, because as we'll see, and as we had seen in some of our preliminary findings or some of what was being said is that, when you're non-tenure track or you're going up for tenure, there is a feeling of how do I handle the politics and the bureaucracy that exists when I know I want to push for a more equitable, more inclusive, more socially just curriculum, and I know very well that if I ruffle a lot of feathers, that might lose my my chances of getting that tenure track. And even though I think there's a lot of times where we don't want to name it, we all know that it exists, right? Like those are the things that we don't want to name because we're afraid that if we do, we're going to be seen in a negative way. And so I think when we're talking also about that performative versus pressure, or looking at community versus solidarity, or that coalition work, it's also recognizing that there's a lot of risks that are at play, right? And how do we help navigate through that and recognizing, I was talking to a faculty member during one of the interviews, and that's what they said. They said, sometimes I feel like I'm trying to make these changes based in equity, and I'm getting a lot of pushback, right? Oh, wait, we want you to be inclusive and, and socially just in your practices, but not too much, okay, right? And those are the systems that we're working with that impact the way that our cohorts are feeling, our faculty are feeling, and I would say trickles down to the way that our students are feeling.
Thank you for that, Leticia. Sorry, I moved forward too fast. So, Leti did mention pushback, and I'll just repeat basically, because again, if you're looking to kind of make a similar program at your institution, you will most likely get pushback because again, the system that Leti had mentioned. And again, it's that disproportional praise. But we also didn't want to have just a cohort of faculty of color doing this work. We didn't think that was fair, right? So we wanted it to be multiracial. And this idea of transactional requests, like I mentioned earlier, like I have this great idea, now you community ambassador, you STEM inclusion outreach specialist, you do it now for me. We wanted to move away from that and make it more collaborative, make it more advisory. Thanh, did you want to mention the grant at all? Because you know more about that.
Yeah, so I think our next step forward is trying to get some funding to expand on the community ambassador program. And and especially, with some summer professional development, because right now, as you've seen, as Leticia had mentioned, some of these, as the tenure track faculty and tenure faculty, um, it's a lot of, it's overwhelming, I think, for them, how to navigate this pushback. And I think that having some professional development on how to navigate this pushback in terms of like strategies and techniques and so forth could be beneficial. And also, being able to evaluate the program too, to see the effectiveness of it. Because I think we're doing some right now, but I think that our time is all constrained. And so I think the funding can make it, I think, also really institutionalize the program at our college, and also, and honestly to have the admin like listen to us more, I think, because right now it's all, compensation for service, and I think it could be a lot more than that.
Right. And just to let you all know, we are in our second year of this program, and this whole second year has been online. So we're really looking forward to having a third year that we can actually see each other. And like Thanh had mentioned, we can do some professional development right before school starts. We have it in the past. We haven't been funded to do so, but I'm hoping to have more conversations about, what are boundaries? How do we talk to somebody when something feels transactional and suggest that it not be, and have these discussions before they kind of are thrown into this position, because we're going to have a lot of new community ambassadors next year. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to open it up for questions. So Alexis, if you want to ask us some questions, I think that would be from the audience, that would be awesome.
Sure, if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A section. I think one of the questions I had to get started was, you talked about there needs to be a lot of alignment with values and understanding of what accountability is and things like that. Suppose that there's a department where there's not a lot of understanding, but you want to build to that, what would you do?
So that's very real. And what we've had is, in the past, we've had CAs that felt very like alone in their department, and they wanted to be able to bring a couple issues to the department. We've offered to go to department meetings with them. So it's not just them at the department meeting, it's like a couple of CAs. I've offered to go with them. It's never gotten to that point, thankfully. But I have also talked to the chair themselves. So sometimes I'll be at a meeting with the chair and the community ambassador, or I'll just meet with the chair, because I think really to get a department on board, the leader of that department really has to be on board and really has to be vocal about their support for this program. And thankfully, most of the chairs have been very vocally supportive of this program. So I would personally, we have run into similar things, but it hasn't gotten to a point where I've had to really step in a lot, but I have a little.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Regina, about having to have that buy-in and support from the chairs and also from the dean, right? And on up. I also would say that part of the accountability piece needs to be built in from the moment that you apply for a position, right? To say, these are the things that we value and this is how it's shown. And so how are we, how are we recruiting our faculty? How are we selecting our faculty? What are ways that we are asking them, straight up, how do you feel about this? Or how do you support students who are not white, right? How, or straight or whatnot, how do you support students who come from marginalized backgrounds, and not in ways of I have a friend, or one time I had this student in my class, but actual tangible ways of what that means for them, because we can continue. And I know that Regina also, in addition to this, also hosts workshops and seminars about what diversity, inclusion, and equity, what that is, right? What are the language, what is the way that we engage in this work, and in a way that's very approachable. And I think Regina, in her position, has done an outstanding job of normalizing those conversations. And we need to be more more in tune with naming what's going on versus trying to sweep it, right? Like, okay, we know that that comment that was just made was extremely sexist, and yet we're going to pretend like we didn't hear it, right? Or the chair doesn't want to address it. And so there's ways that we need to show accountability, not just in the evaluation process, but actually also in the ways that we are changing a culture within the college. So
let's see. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something. Allison, feel free to ask questions. I know it's a little late for some of us on the East Coast, but questions are always welcome.
Yeah, apologies. It's not as late over here. So it's sunny too.
Weird. So a quick question then would be, what happens if somebody's interested in participating in this program and you know them pretty well and you don't think they're suitable for whatever reasons? How do you handle that?
I try to be as kind as possible because I do want to make it very clear that these positions, this program is at its most beneficial, its most successful if everyone is around the same level of engagement in equity and inclusion, and that we all have kind of a similar understanding of like language, of like how to approach things, of what assimilation is, of what white supremacy is. Like if a faculty member wasn't really familiar, or at least if they weren't open to talking about that stuff, maybe they're not familiar. Maybe like tell me more about like how you see this program as assimilating. Like I don't know, like tell me. That is fine. I think having a faculty member like that would be fine. But kind of if I had somebody who shut down at those kind of conversations, it's not, I'm okay with people thinking I'm mean, instead of them becoming a faculty ambassador and having like a student or another faculty member be feeling like they're not supported by this faculty member. So I tell people that maybe you're not at that place yet, and maybe in a couple years you will be, but maybe now is not the best time to do this. And I'm really looking forward to like helping you out and showing you resources that are going to help you get to that point. But maybe now is not the best time. And I've had similar conversations, and I'm not loved by everybody, but it's okay. It's okay to have that. The only sad thing is that sometimes we don't have a lot of faculty members that have the ability to do this position too. Like they're very heavy in research, or they were just hired. So sometimes there is somebody maybe right on that line. And when that happens, I have to be a lot more aware and a lot more helpful with that faculty member throughout the year.
One thing that I think you've done really well, Regina, is always making sure the student voice is included, right? Is that they're always there as part of, going through the applications and helping also get that student perspective, and in particular BIPOC students who can say, I don't know if I would come to this faculty member with this application. I don't know if I would feel supported. And I think that that's a really important tool to utilize when you're going through the applications, to be able to have that lens that removes us from this, like just seeing it as colleagues, but puts in that other lens of this is impacting our students. So I think that's another thing that this program has done really well, is always including that voice and that lens.
I think it's also, I think for my colleagues that feel that they might be on that line, the colleagues that are sitting here listening, to this webinar, or, watching it again, if you feel you're right on that line, and somebody like me tells you, I don't know, maybe in a couple years, try not to be defensive, try not to be mad, like try to be like, maybe they're right. Maybe I've been in this kind of work for over a decade. So I can kind of tell, when somebody doesn't quite get the source of a microaggression, right? They might say something and they may not understand why that would be the best thing to say, right? Or they haven't been as engaged in the programs across campus as other people have. So maybe this other person is better for this position, right? Like, I think that we as academics, we want to believe that we're like really great at a lot of things. And we are, right? We have a PhD, we are good at a lot of things, but I think a lot of people want to be also great at inclusion. And maybe they've just started and they don't like that they're not great at it yet. And we were just talking at the beginning of this webinar that I'm an educator at Western, and all educators and actually staff get a free class, right? A quarter. So I take advantage of that and I take a class. And it's very humbling to be crappier than 20-year-olds at a subject in class. And I think a lot of my colleagues who, feel that defensiveness sometimes, feel it rise up, to know that like, we all are learning, and we're all at some point in our lives didn't know the subject, okay? and it's okay. It's okay to feel that discomfort. It's okay to not know. And the only way to get better, like we tell our students, especially our physics students, they go like, just tell me the answer. Just tell me the equation. Just tell me, like, they don't want to know why, right? And I have a lot of faculty colleagues that are like that. Just like, tell me what not to say. Just tell me what not to say. I don't want to be seen as racist or sexist or homophobic, right? But that's not the point, right? Just like in physics, you actually have to understand what the source, what the foundation, what is going on. You can't just like plug and chug, right? So inclusion is not plug and chug. And I think if there's a faculty member who's still at that stage where they kind of don't totally get that it's not plug and chug, they wouldn't really benefit from this program, and they wouldn't be able to add to this program, right?
Well, thank you. And I would like to have a t-shirt or a tote bag, because I don't wear t-shirts with writing on that says that about inclusion. So consider making that. We have some questions now from the audience. I apologize if I missed this in the presentation, but has there been any discussion on making this type of work part of what faculty can include in retention and promotion packets as a way to value this work?
Yeah, there has. Thanh, did you want to talk about that? You were on the EID committee.
Sure. So every department in our college has an EID requirement now. So faculty need to engage in equity, inclusion, and diversity. And that is like really broad in terms of like what can be included or not, So the short answer is yes, but also I honestly think that like faculty can get promoted by doing very little, EID work. And if research is very valued, it's what's valued, or at least that my perception as a tenure track in the physics department, that people can do very little and claim that they do EID work, and sometimes it's like, oh, I took a workshop. Like, for example, I did Regina's like ISM workshop, because Regina does like several workshops on campus, a series of them, and that could be enough for tenure and promotion. So it really depends on the department and what the value, but like my sense is that right now it's just a name, like do it, right? Like it's very superficial, and I don't get a sense that it is a meaningful process right now, because I think we focus on the outcomes of like the checklist of things that we do, and not necessarily in ways that we, the process and ways we engage in this work.
Thanks for asking, Mel.
Yes, thank you. And I think this one's kind of a big question is, in doing this work, what strategies do you have for maintaining your own patience and allowing individuals to learn gradually when these issues feel so urgent? And I think this will be our last question, because I think that's a big question.
Does anyone else want to answer that first?
Well, I mean, I'll take a try. Regina was talking earlier about like this being a journey, and I think that that because we know that this is a journey, and because we work with at least when I work with students, is the population doesn't change, the students do, but we're always going to have 18 through 22-year-olds who have been raised in the system, or who have been raised to think a certain way or to put biases. And although I do think that this incoming class is going to really be a very different one, and maybe, you know, so much hope and excitement in moving things forward. But it's recognizing that this educational piece is really what's at core. And I think that's what grounds me, is recognizing that these things are very urgent. And as long as I continue to name it, and as long as I continue to have these conversations to challenge students or colleagues in what their truth is at that moment, does not mean that truths don't change, right? Or our perception of what is our truth or at that moment can be moved. And so I think about, I mean, really rough conversations. I mean, when I don't know how many times Regina and Thanh have seen me crying over like a frustrating experience that we've had, whether on campus or in the community or wherever, because these things are real and they matter to us, and that's really hard. But similar to what our ambassadors were saying, there's something about being in a cohort, being in a group of individuals like my two counterparts who get it, and I don't have to explain everything, because they already know what that feeling is. And so for me, it's a combination of recognizing that this is my journey, and I'm going through journeys with all these people, and I need to respect where my part of the journey needs to get moved on to someone else. And also I have people who get it without me having to relive that every moment. So, but I mean, yeah, that's my try of that answer.
I don't always have patience. I lose my patience. And I think because I'm a human being and I'm not perfect. I mean, I might look that way, but there are days where I have no patience and I like cancel my meetings and I'm like, I can't handle this anymore. Right. And then there's days where I'm like super hopeful and I'm like, thank God I played the long game. Like I teach at the institution that I went for undergrad. I went here. I grew up in this region. So I know a lot of these people for decades. I've known some of my colleagues since I was a student, and I play the long game. And I think it's hard to explain that to people who really want change now, because I wanted that change now too. I felt that too. Like I was there too, but like when you do this work long enough, you start to see like where certain interactions and certain relationships pay off, right? And it just takes a really long time. And I'm almost 40. I'm gonna be 40 this year. And I've just been looking back on like all the relationships I've made. And like when you hit these really hard things and you lose your patience because somebody you care about, you're like, but you should know this, right? But you know, because it's a coworker that you care about, you have to be like, no, but you care about them. And like, you have to ask them a question. And if they ask you a question, they care about you. You know, of course, we don't care about all of our colleagues and we're not friends with all of our colleagues, but some of the people you build relationships with, that long game pays off. And like, then when those people that you built relationships with have more and more power, then they listen to you and then you gain power. You need to just be more aware. And like Letty says, you have to listen to the young folk and you have to like hear what they're saying. And if they yell at you and they're like, why aren't you doing more? Maybe you should be doing more. Or you can tell them, because I don't want to die and you want me to still be here. So don't push me any harder because I might leave, right? So there's a fine line. I think there's not good and bad. There's a spectrum and there is like sanity. And in the end of the day, I really just want to like watch TV and eat nice food and go on a cruise. Like in the end of the day, that's really what I want. My job is not my life. And that's what I tell myself. Like my job is not my identity. This is important work. But if I have to walk away from my sanity for a week, for a year, for an hour, then I will do that. And that's how I deal with it.
Any final thoughts you want to close with? Anyone? Okay.
No, I love cruises. I think that's next year, my husband and I will be married for 20 years. So we're going on a cruise. I'm just like counting the days.
Oh, well, thank you so much then, all three of you. This was a great webinar. It will be uploaded to the APT YouTube, and I will send out an email to everybody when it is. There will be a webinar in June that we're still trying to schedule the day and time, but I believe it'll be on 2-year, 4-year college partnerships. And I'm going to close down the recording.